How do I what?
How do you assess the group?
Oh, how do I make the groups? Oh, I'm going to get to that in a bit. Okay, I'm going to give you some. Yeah, grading these things is difficult. I really appreciate that question. So, let me tell you about my class, and then I'll get to the answer to that question in just a bit. There's no perfect way, but there are some ways that are a little bit better than others, I think. This is a photograph of the last day of class in one of my courses recently. I teach, in addition to teaching statistics and research methods, I teach a course on introductory psychology. It's a beginning level class, but these are honor students, and they're sophomores, and they're very, very bright, and they're very, very energetic. I mean, I was talking to somebody about, how one of the difficult things about being a teacher is that you have students that are really bright, and you have students who are not so bright, and then you have everybody in the middle. Who do you teach to? When you have an honors class, everybody's bright. Everybody is bright. That's why it's called an honors class. So I feel really lucky to teach that kind of student. So what this student is doing, his name is Henry. His group has developed a poster. That was their project. The poster's based on a paper. That was another project they had to do. And what he's doing here is distilling the paper into a poster, and he's having to explain to other students what problem they addressed, what project they addressed, and how they addressed it. So with this particular type of project, they're working on written skills and oral skills. So I'm sort of killing two birds with one stone there. Okay. So what I'd like you to do is turn to page 6 in your handout. I'll walk you through this fairly quickly. Page 6. So I wanted to have them take what they were learning in my course, and I wanted them to choose a problem, a project, an issue that was important at the regional, the national, or the global level. And what you have on page 6 is my guidelines for how to do that. So what I did is I described what the task was. I told them they could work as individuals or as a group, and almost everybody chose to work as a group because that cuts down their workload as well. I told them what the format was, that they had to produce both a paper and a poster, and both of those were graded. I gave them some guidelines for the paper. The length had to be 10 pages. It had to be written in what we call American psychological style, which is a very common method of writing. We outlined what had to be in the paper in terms of components. So there was a title page, there was a statement of the problem, overview of the significant research that had been done on the problem, and so on and so forth. Then I gave them the poster guidelines, and my university will create posters for free for students. They have a big poster machine. I gave them a deadline for both the paper and the poster. Now notice that the deadline for the paper was the 14th of November. The deadline for the poster was Thursday the 5th of December, 3 weeks. That gave me the opportunity to grade the papers so that they could use that feedback to create their posters. So if you're going to do sort of a dual project like this, you want to think about it. You can't have them both do it at the same time. I wanted them to benefit from editing. And then down below, we have the grading criteria for the paper. It was worth 35 points. The grading criteria for the poster was worth 35 points. And notice how we broke out different components. So that different parts of the paper, different parts of the poster were worth different amounts of points. So when you create a rubric, that's exactly what you're doing. So students know this ahead of time, that this is how they're going to be graded. They pay attention to it. Now, read the note below, and this is going to get a little bit to your question. Say that again. Who picked the topics? I allowed the students to pick the topics, and I created the rubric. I created the rubric by myself. As sophomores, I didn't really feel that they had the experience enough to be insightful on how to evaluate what they were doing. But I gave this to them ahead of time, so they were well aware of it. I'm going to read something down below. And this is going to get to your question. Note, both the paper and the poster will be evaluated by your teammates. So what I did is I graded the paper like I would any paper. I graded the poster like I would any poster. But that was not sufficient. So here's what I did next. They will each be asked to recommend a percentage of the final grade that you should receive for your contribution to the quality and completion of the project. Okay?
Can you explain that?
Yeah, I will in a few minutes.
I will provide the assessment. Do you provide assessment?
I provided, so here, well, let me get ahead of myself. Let's say I gave the paper, just to make it easy, let's say I gave it 100%. But the teammates evaluated one student at 90%. I would take that 100, multiply it by 90%, so they would get a 90 as a final grade on that paper. Because there's no way for me to know in a team effort who did what. Because there's a term in psychology called social loafing. The bigger the group, the more likely it is any one person is going to take it easy. They're going to loaf. Okay. We've all been through that. And sometimes we've been the loafer. Sometimes we've been the one who's done the work. But I needed a way to account for that. And although this is not perfect, at least it gives the teammates an opportunity to contribute their understanding, their knowledge of what that person did to the teacher. I will then take the average of these percentages for each group member to calculate final grades on your paper and poster. So the objective final grade times the average teammate's percentage grade will equal your final grade on that.
So what is the criteria to write the rubrics? Is there any criteria to write the rubrics?
Yes, and part of that's given down here, and then I'm going to have you flip some pages now. So if you'll turn to page 7, This is the rubric that I used to grade the papers. And I gave all the students a copy of this rubric ahead of time. If you turn to page 8, there's a rubric for grading the poster. Students had a copy of this in advance. Turn to page 9, and this is the form that I gave the students. This is the form I gave the students to evaluate each other.
Yeah, this part, to me, there are some, I don't know, I feel that there will be some conflict of interest or some individual issue, like personality issue, if the group is not really good teammates, maybe they will grade low for the other one, or I don't know, and then that will bring a better experience from people, don't you?
I actually do, and here's how the rest of it goes. So your question is really good. The question over here that came up among the men is a really insightful question. He said, I feel a little bit uncomfortable with this, because it could be that personalities don't match. It could be that if you give a student a low grade, if three members of a 4-person team give the other student a low grade, it'll create a bitter experience. Absolutely, perfectly correct. So here's what I do next. I collect all these from the students. And when I do have, I think it occurs very rarely, when I do have a situation where the teammates have really downgraded that other person, I call the teammates in. And I will say to them, explain to me, please, why you came up with these numbers. So what I then try to decide is whether it's a personality thing or whether it's an effort thing. And I'll give you a perfect example. Here's what happened. I had a team of 4 people. And 3 of the teammates gave this person between a 30% and a 60%. So So I called them in and I said, explain this to me. So I'm pretty sure that I get pretty honest reflections. So what I did in this particular case is I took those three numbers. I think there was a 30 and two 60s. And so when you add those up and divide by 3, it gives you 50%. So I talked to the students and I found out that there was in fact some personality conflict. But that the person was actually not doing the work. Not meeting the deadlines that the group had established to get done. So what I did was, I gave that person a 65 rather than a 50. Because I did feel like personality entered in some way, and that way the person got a D in the paper and not an F. So I made that compromise. But it's going to be a judgment on your side. So then, that student who was downgraded came into my class mad as hell, okay? And I had to sit down and talk to him, and I said, did you meet this deadline? Did you meet this deadline? Did you meet this deadline? He said, well, no, I didn't. I said, well, then you have to pay a consequence for that. And that's what happened. Person still was not ecstatic, but at least there was some discussion and understanding of why that person received that grade. So.
Just a follow-up question to that. And that will be more related to our culture here.
Yeah.
Have you been to this, like everybody gave everyone 100%?
I have never had everybody give everybody 100%, but I can understand the rationale of how that would happen. Exactly right. And there are ways to get around that with deadlines and things, because you can actually have the material turned into you before it's turned into the groups. That way you can sort of check on that. And that was the main problem that this one group had was deadlines. Yes, sir.
When I have the project, I just have to know, they just ask them to pick a leader for the group and ask they have like feedback or interviews. Either they have problem with the leader or the leader has any problem with each one of them.
Yeah, and that's a good idea.
Just updating.
Yeah.
So I can just pick
Yeah.
the problem and see the person.
That's a good point. Let me address it as a group. One of the points on the men's side is a really good point. That is, when these groups form, if you're going to use groups for a project, generally what happens is a leader emerges. And most of the time what happens is volunteer. I don't have to appoint him. Because the way I did this group was I think I've got some slides. So let me hold off on that. Okay? But usually I have no problem with leadership because somebody comes up and grabs the mantle of responsibility and says, okay, I'll be in charge to see that this is done. And that happens very easily. But I think it's important that each group has a leader to make sure deadlines are being met, things are getting done when they're supposed to get done. Absolutely. Ladies, do you have any questions? So the ladies had a really good point here, and that is that you want to establish a system in which you are getting feedback from the groups as to what's going on periodically in each group so that you can ensure that students are stepping up and meeting their responsibility. Is that correct? Okay. Yeah, exactly right. That the task is clarified and what everybody's job is related to that task is also clarified. Yeah, very good. Very good. There was another hand.
If I'd like to elaborate my colleague's point of view, I'm thinking of applying this in my classes next semester, but I would like an expert's opinion. I was thinking on the same lines. For example, I would give student 1 research, 1, 2 research, 3 the design of a poster, and 4. But I was thinking, for example, it's 10 marks. Each student gets 5 marks on their respective task, and then they get a 5 mark, which is a group, so that they do really do their work. So is this good?
That is something that could work. But what you have to be sure of is that when you're dividing up those responsibilities, that those responsibilities are about equal.
Yes.
Both in terms of effort and how it contributes to the final product. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah. It's like I said earlier, guys, that there's all sorts of ways to do this, and we have a pretty good idea that if you wanted to divide up the responsibilities yourself in the group, that it's capable to do that as well. Very good points. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about process, because that's some of the things that are coming up with questions and points. And a gentleman over here just had a really good question about how often do you provide feedback? So let me tell you a little bit about that. So up here what I've done is I have outlined my process, and again, it's just one of many. What I've done here is students submit ideas to me. So the first 10 days of class, they just are thinking about, what do I want to do for my project? What do I want to do? How does it relate to sort of an important global or regional or local problem? And then I take all those topics and I throw some of them out because they're really bad ideas. Okay? And then I come up with a list, usually of like, 8 to 12. And I pass those out, and I'll say to the students, here are the ideas that I thought would work really well this semester for this class. And I let them look at them and think about them. And I usually give them 2 or 3 days. And then they come back and I say, okay, let's form groups based on your interest in a topic. So rather than saying, okay, you 5 people have to form a group, you 4 people have to form a group, I'll say, let's form around what we're interested in. What issues are we really interested in here? So that students are doing something they want to do. You know, I always hated it as a student when the teacher said, you've got to write a term paper on this topic and this topic only. Giving students choices helps them buy into the class. It helps them like the class a little bit better. So that's what we did.